Buried beneath centuries of tradition lies a vault few even know exists. It's not the jewel house at the tower. It's far more personal, far more dangerous. When Queen Camilla descended into it for the first time, she believed she was prepared. What she found instead shattered her illusions, and possibly her marriage. Before we start, your support through a like and subscribe means a lot. Thank you. Every crown has its secrets, but Charles had his hidden behind reinforced steel, tucked beneath the palace itself, in a vault so secret even some senior courtiers had only whispered about its existence. Unlike the public crown jewels, those heavily guarded, catalogued, and displayed under glass, this vault was unmarked, undocumented, and strictly off the books. The late Queen Elizabeth was said to have never acknowledged it publicly. She didn't need to. Everyone who mattered already understood one unspoken rule. Only the monarch and their spouse were allowed to enter. No historians, no advisors, not even family. After Elizabeth's death, the key, both literal and symbolic, passed to Charles. But it wasn't until the dust of his coronation had barely settled that Camilla requested access. Not out of curiosity, not even power. According to one insider, her request came with a quiet urgency, as if she'd heard something, or feared something. The vault had been closed for decades, and now, for the first time since her marriage to Charles, she was walking toward it alone. It said she was gone for hours. That security was told to remain 3 floors above. That when she returned, her face had changed. Not the face of a queen, not the polished mask of duty, but someone who had seen something they weren't meant to see and couldn't unsee. Camilla, always composed, had gone silent. No one dared ask why, but in royal circles, the silence was loud. Days later, her staff reported unusual behavior. Certain jewelry was returned unworn. Scheduled public appearances were cancelled without reason. One palace official described her as visibly haunted. Was it grief? Was it guilt? Or was it something more? Camilla never spoke of that visit again. Not to Charles, not to her ladies-in-waiting, not even to the archivists tasked with preserving royal memory. But rumors grew, especially among those closest to the vault's long-standing legend, because the true purpose of that room was never ceremonial. It was where monarchs placed the things too sensitive for history, too scandalous for inheritance, and too powerful for public eyes. Some believed the vault contained documents, old letters, private records, personal apologies never sent. Others whispered of jewels that had never been worn in public, heirlooms given and taken in anger, state gifts buried in shame. But whatever theories existed, they all pointed to one thing. The vault was not just a storage room, it was a reckoning chamber. And for Camilla, it was more than discovery. It was confrontation. Not with ghosts, but with the man she had waited decades to marry. And what she found confirmed the one fear she never voiced aloud, that she was living inside someone else's unfinished story. That in the shadow of Diana, in the crown that once seemed so impossible, she had inherited not just a title, but a burden of secrets that could destroy more than reputations. They could collapse the fragile illusion the monarchy had worked so hard to maintain. But Camilla's silence wasn't just out of reverence, it was self-protection. Because what she discovered next rewrote everything she believed about her husband's past. Among velvet-lined trays and gilded chests was one unmarked, unloved, untouched, except for a single emblem: Diana's crest. Camilla opened it. What lay inside made her feel like an intruder on a love story that refused to die, even in death. Tucked into the deepest corner of the vault, behind towering cases of coronation jewels and diplomatic regalia, was a box that didn't belong. It wasn't catalogued, it wasn't mentioned in any of the vault's entries, yet it sat there, deliberately placed, carefully preserved, bearing no official royal markings. Only the familiar D monogram Charles once had engraved for Diana in their early years of marriage. Camilla hesitated. Even in a room filled with the monarchy's most potent symbols, this box radiated something far heavier: unresolved grief. When she lifted the lid, the silence around her changed. The contents weren't the glimmering tiaras or ceremonial brooches expected of royal safekeeping. These were different, intimate, a delicate collection of pieces Diana never wore in public, but were instantly recognizable as Charles's style. His taste in design, his signature choice of sapphires. Jewelry wrapped not in palace velvet, but in worn linen. Time had passed, but it hadn't erased the scent of secrecy. Camilla reached inside, fingers trembling. One envelope, one letter, addressed not to William, not to Harry, but simply to C. The handwriting was unmistakable, slanted, elegant, and deeply familiar. The letter wasn't long, but it pierced like a blade. Diana's words weren't vengeful. They were restrained, as if written during her final attempt to make peace with the betrayal that shaped her world. She acknowledged the affair, the silence, the humiliation, but she ended with something Camilla never expected to read. Forgiven, but never forgotten. That sentence echoed in her mind like a royal curse, a sentence that no crown could outweigh. And then came the bracelet. Camilla knew the engagement ring had been passed to William, but this bracelet, it was unlike anything she'd seen in Diana's public wardrobe. A wide sapphire cuff, deeper in blue than any ocean, surrounded by diamonds so large they seemed excessive even by royal standards. It shimmered not with luxury, but with intention. This was a gift from Charles, personal, extravagant, and hidden. Why had Diana never worn it? Why had Charles kept it here? Why had no one mentioned it in all the years since her death? Camilla's breath caught. Suddenly, she saw the vault for what it truly was, not just a place to hide objects, but emotions. The ghosts of Charles's past were not buried. They were carefully preserved. She realized she wasn't merely discovering artifacts. She was walking through the remnants of a marriage that had never truly ended. Charles had locked away not only jewelry, but guilt, grief, and perhaps love. That changed everything. Camilla had thought herself the final chapter. But now, it seemed she was merely the continuation of a story the monarchy refused to close. The betrayal that had once existed in the tabloids now felt freshly alive. But this time, it wasn't public. It was private, stifling, and dangerously raw. Camilla was no longer just a queen consort. She was a keeper of truths that could unravel the carefully crafted myth of royal redemption. The longer she stood in that vault, the more she realized she wasn't just looking into the past. She was standing inside a legacy Charles never intended her to witness. But the vault held more than relics of love. It hid objects that were never meant to see daylight again. And Camilla was about to uncover one. There are jewels the public celebrates, and those the monarchy buries. One necklace in particular had once caused scandal behind palace walls. Camilla never expected to find it nestled in silk, deliberately erased from memory by royal command. It wasn't grand like the Cullinan diamonds, nor historic like the Queen Mary bandeau. But it radiated danger. The moment Camilla unfolded the deep burgundy cloth and saw the glint of fire-orange stones set in a heavy gold collar, she knew this was no ordinary piece. It was the necklace that had nearly ignited a diplomatic storm decades ago. When Charles accepted it, During a controversial visit to a regime the palace had sworn to distance itself from. The visit had drawn backlash, and so had the gift. The necklace was never worn, never photographed. It vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, the press assuming it had been returned. But it hadn't. It had been hidden. Camilla stared at it, stunned. The necklace had been ordered sealed by Queen Elizabeth herself, a rare intervention made to protect the crown from public outrage. It was too politically loaded, too symbolically toxic. Its jewels were mined in a region known for conflict, funded by a government under international scrutiny. And yet, despite the risk, despite the order to remove all trace of it from the royal collection, Charles had kept it. Not just kept it, preserved it with care. And now it sat before Camilla, gleaming with the weight of defiance. She felt her pulse quicken. The implications weren't just personal, they were constitutional. By retaining the necklace, Charles had violated an unspoken royal law. Never protect a gift that endangers the family's image. This was no longer about legacy. This was about power, control. And the question she didn't want to ask, why? Why had Charles risked so much to keep this piece? What did it represent? Was it leverage? A souvenir of rebellion? But something in her stopped. Perhaps it. But something in her stopped. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was strategy. Or maybe, in that moment, she realized just how many lines had already been crossed in silence. She closed the case without a word. The necklace remained untouched, yet now exposed in her mind as a quiet threat to everything the monarchy tried to bury under pearls and protocol. This wasn't just about what Charles had kept. It was about what else he had hidden. If the vault could hold something this explosive, something even Elizabeth had tried to erase, what else was waiting beneath those stones and shadows? And still, the vault revealed more. Something not tied to politics or romance, but to betrayal, hidden for decades, inside a second compartment. Only 2 royals had access to this next level of the vault, Charles and Princess Anne. But why would Anne, loyal to her mother to the end, co-sign the sealing of a secret Camilla was never meant to see? Camilla had already seen too much, but when her hand brushed against the ridged edge of what appeared to be a separate panel, hidden behind a false wall of the vault, she felt the chill of something forbidden. A narrow compartment, carved into the stone itself, sealed by a small brass panel that bore 2 royal crests, Charles's and Anne's. It wasn't ceremonial. This was deliberate. A security protocol requiring both their signatures to unlock. It hadn't been touched in years. The dust hadn't settled. It had been locked away before the rain changed hands. And Camilla, standing alone with only a ring of keys and the weight of questions pressing down, knew she had no choice. Charles had left behind a master key. Whether intentionally or by careless trust, she couldn't be sure. But what she did know was this. Anne had never once mentioned this second layer. Not during Elizabeth's passing. Not during the handover. Not even when the topic of vault security was discussed. The silence wasn't oversight. It was protection. Or perhaps obstruction. Because whatever lay behind that panel wasn't meant for Camilla. It wasn't meant for any queen. The mechanism clicked open with a slow grind, revealing a single black folder placed beside a box, smaller than the others, but wrapped in a cloth darker than royal blue. Camilla unfolded the contents with a growing sense of dread. Inside the folder was a handwritten inventory. Its title was damning in its simplicity. Not for inheritance. The handwriting was Anne's. And beneath that were item descriptions, dozens of them, each with a red mark beside it. But it was the language that struck deepest. Unsuitable for future queens. to remain sealed, retain only in vault custody. She recognized some of the names, private items once rumored but never verified. A brooch gifted to Wallace Simpson, a pendant worn only once by Margaret before being withdrawn from public display, and one item simply labeled, "Elizabeth's request, do not transfer." These weren't just neglected heirlooms. They were locked stories, pieces of history scrubbed from the royal timeline, objects too politically inconvenient or emotionally dangerous to surface. And now, Camilla understood what this second chamber really was. It was a graveyard of power. She felt it in her chest, the sting of rejection. This wasn't about protocol. This was personal. A decision made long before she wore the crown. She had been deliberately excluded. Her future as queen considered, but not welcomed. Even as consort, even after decades of waiting, she had been kept outside this final door. And it was Anne who had signed it shut. Camilla sat with the realization that the monarchy had tiers of acceptance, and she had reached her ceiling. The jewels weren't the threat. The secrecy was, and it had a name, a signature, a sister's hand. Anne had drawn the line, and Charles had followed. Together, they had buried a legacy Camilla was never meant to inherit. Not because she wasn't royal enough, but because she wasn't Diana. But among these forbidden objects was one piece that stopped her cold. Because it was supposed to be buried with Queen Elizabeth herself. The palace declared it lost. The public believed it had been cremated with Elizabeth. But Camilla held it in her trembling hand, the brooch known only to the inner circle as the Silent Crown. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbol, a weapon, a final word from a monarch who spoke in decisions more than declarations. The Silent Crown was never worn in public. It never appeared in official portraits or jubilee appearances. But, within the family, it held a reverence that rivaled the coronation regalia itself. Passed down not through ceremony, but through quiet selection. Only one queen in a generation wore it, and even then, only once. It was said to embody not just succession, but sovereignty. Whoever possessed it wasn't merely a consort or a figurehead. They were the chosen anchor of the monarchy's soul. After Elizabeth's death, there were whispers. It hadn't been seen at the funeral. No one addressed its absence. The assumption, carefully fed by the palace, was that it had been interred with her, a final gesture of modesty and finality. But Camilla now knew that was a lie, because here it was. Cold, heavy, real, wrapped not in velvet, but in the Queen's own mourning shawl. That choice alone told Camilla everything. She stared at it, stunned. The diamonds were darkened with time, the gold clasp slightly bent, but the message was intact. The Silent Crown was not buried. It had been hidden, removed, preserved, stolen. And the only person with access to Elizabeth in her final hours and the authority to retrieve something from her casket was Charles. Camilla's stomach twisted. She had imagined this vault revealing Charles's secrets, yes, but this was something else entirely. This was a betrayal of legacy, of sacred ritual, of trust. The Queen had made her intentions known, for this to be with her forever, for it to die with her. And Charles had undone that, quietly, secretly, and had never told Camilla, not even when she became queen. Why? That was the question that clawed at her. Why had he taken it? To preserve it? To protect it from her? Or worse, to keep it from being passed to someone else? Perhaps it was meant for Anne, or Catherine. Perhaps Elizabeth hadn't wanted it to be worn by the woman who had once fractured the very image of royal unity. And Charles, torn between duty and guilt, chose to take it rather than let the past deliver its verdict. Camilla couldn't breathe. The idea that her husband would defy his mother's dying wish and never tell her was more than betrayal. It was a fracture, a split between the man she thought she knew and the monarch he had become. The vault, it seemed, wasn't just his inheritance. It was his confession. She placed the brooch back in its cloth. Her fingers shook, not from fear, but from recognition. Because she finally understood, she wasn't being protected from the monarchy's secrets. She was the secret. And perhaps she always had been. And then came the final blow. Something not hidden in a box, but playing on an old reel tucked beneath royal tapestries. Camilla expected jewels, not a cassette labeled simply 1996, private. When she pressed play, she heard a voice not meant for her. Charles, unfiltered, unrehearsed, confessing to a betrayal neither crown nor church would forgive. The tape clicked, a faint hiss of static, and then his voice, younger, sharper, but unmistakably Charles. Not the refined tones of a public address. This was raw, private, painfully honest. He spoke as if to no one, or perhaps to himself. The year was 1996. His marriage to Diana was disintegrating in public view, but this recording captured the unraveling that no lens had witnessed. Charles spoke of guilt, how it grew like mold behind the palace walls. He admitted his heart had wandered long before his vows were broken, and that what began as escape became obsession. His voice trembled as he referenced the damage inflicted on a woman he no longer knew how to love, yet couldn't seem to free. And then came the first blow. He confessed to making an agreement with the Queen, one that neither the church nor the crown would ever acknowledge. That certain jewels, state gifts originally intended for Diana, would never make it to the official registry. Instead, they would be sealed, hidden, never discussed. In exchange, he would accept the terms of the separation without further protest. It was, as he called it, the cost of peace. But it wasn't peace he bought. It was silence. Camilla sat frozen as he continued. She heard her own name, softly spoken, almost reverent, and yet not with certainty, but with doubt. He said he didn't believe a future with her was possible, that the institution will never allow it, that perhaps it was fate's punishment, that the love he had clung to in secret would never step into daylight. It was not an ode. It was not a plan. It was a resignation. In that moment, Camilla realized Charles had once believed she was nothing more than a ghost tethered to his past. She listened as he spoke of promises, some made to his mother, others to himself. Promises he would eventually break. He had said he would never remarry. He had sworn the vault would remain locked forever. He had vowed to protect the memory of Diana, not preserve it like a shrine, but let it rest. Yet every item she'd found proved otherwise. Every locked drawer, every forbidden object, every unspoken choice was a broken promise, laid bare in velvet. And now, Camilla was left to ask the question she had avoided for years. Was she ever Plan A? Or merely the convenient successor to a dream that had already shattered? She turned the tape off before it ended. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was confirmation. Confirmation that she had built her queenship not on solid ground, but on the fragile ashes of a love that never truly died. After everything she'd seen and heard, Camilla thought she had reached the bottom. But a letter tucked beneath the tape revealed one final chilling twist. The envelope was sealed with wax, the handwriting unmistakably Charles's, but it wasn't addressed to her. For William only. And yet, It was in her vault now. One read, one decision, and she'd hold leverage that could destroy everything. She stared at it, unmoving. Of all the relics, betrayals, and buried truths she had uncovered that day, this was the most damning. Not because of what it said, but because it was never meant for her. The seal hadn't been broken. Not yet. But the temptation, raw, immediate, dangerous, gripped her harder than anything else inside that vault. Camilla understood the weight of private letters. In royal life, words last longer than memory, and ink holds more power than blood. This letter, clearly written in Charles's hand, was not dated. But its language, its very existence, signaled that it had been composed with death in mind. A final confession, a last attempt to pass the burden on. It began simply, "To my son, when the crown is no longer mine." His tone was neither regal nor distant. It was filled with hesitation, with conflict. He spoke of the vault, this vault, acknowledging it should have been dismantled, that its contents and his failure to address them would one day demand a reckoning. He asked William not to forgive, but to understand. That certain pieces were hidden to protect the institution. That some truths had been too dangerous to surface during his reign. That silence, in his view, had been an act of mercy. And then came the lines that shifted the air in Camilla's lungs. He admitted to withholding certain jewels from Harry. Not out of spite, he insisted, but necessity. "You'll come to understand," he wrote, "some inheritances are more dangerous than death." It was the kind of cryptic reasoning Camilla had heard whispered by palace aides over the years, but here it was in writing. Charles had orchestrated more than damage control. He had engineered legacy with surgical precision. He went on to ask William to restore what I could not, to make peace where he had caused fracture, to return certain heirlooms, if possible, to burn others. He never named them, but Camilla already knew which ones he meant. She had held them. She had wept over them. And now, her fingers trembled with the knowledge that this letter not only absolved Charles, but condemned everything surrounding him, including her. The monarchy would survive many storms, but this letter, if made public, would tear open the facade of unity they had all worked so hard to preserve. It would prove that even kings bend the truth, that even monarchs bury their shame. Camilla stood at a crossroads. She could give the letter to William. Let him see his father not as a sovereign, but as a man, flawed, scared, human. She could destroy it, pretend she never saw it, and carry the secret into her own grave. Or she could keep it, quietly, strategically, as protection, as leverage, as power. She did none of those things, not entirely. What she chose instead has kept her silent to this day. Why hasn't Camilla spoken about what she found? Not to Charles, not to William, not even to the palace archivists. The answer isn't duty, it's fear of what the truth would do to a royal house already cracking beneath the weight of its own lies. After that day, something in her changed. To the public, she remained composed, dutiful, ever smiling. But to those who'd known her longest, the shift was undeniable. The woman who once wore history on her neck now chose absence over adornment. Tiaras quietly disappeared from events where they were once expected. State dinners passed without the glint of a single signature brooch. Photographers noted it. So did stylists. So did the courtiers who scrambled for explanations none could give. And yet, no one dared to ask. Behind closed doors, Camilla became withdrawn. Not from duty, but from belief. Her relationship with Charles grew cooler, more performative. They spoke when needed, smiled when required. But the warmth that had once been their defiant tether in the face of scandal now thinned into something brittle. The vault had not just revealed the past, it had rewritten the present. And every time she looked at him, she saw not her husband, but the architect of a sealed world he never intended her to enter. She had been warned before, by Elizabeth, by Anne, by the silence that surrounded so much of her royal path, that there were places Camilla could go, and places she should never touch. And now, having stepped into the latter, she understood why. The vault had not just held secrets, it had held judgments, calculated omissions, quiet punishments. And she had been at the center of them all, never explicitly named, yet clearly accounted for in everything that had been hidden. Her silence wasn't a strategy, it was survival. The monarchy thrived on controlled narrative, on unity sculpted from fracture. To speak of what she found, of the letter, the brooch, the recordings, would mean detonating a system built on centuries of discretion. She couldn't do it. Not yet. Not without consequence. Not without collateral damage that would stain more than just Charles. William, the children, the future of the institution itself. And maybe that's what hurt most. That her silence was not a show of loyalty to the man she married, but a final, reluctant service to the crown that never fully accepted her. When she locked the vault again, she did so alone. No aides, no security, just her hand on the keypad, changing the code. One final digit erased the past from reach, and no one, not even Charles, was told the new combination. Not a word, not a trace. But perhaps the most haunting question isn't what Camilla found in that vault, it's what she's planning to do with it, once Charles is gone. Camilla holds the key to a hidden past, and a future that could collapse if she speaks. As succession looms, the jewels beneath Buckingham Palace remain untouched, undocumented, and damning. And Camilla? She's still deciding whether to keep the crown or burn it. What began as a descent into royal tradition ended in a confrontation with buried truths. Camilla didn't just uncover jewels, she unlocked a system of secrets held together by duty, silence, and selective memory. From Diana's untouched heirlooms, to the necklace that nearly ignited a diplomatic crisis, to a brooch that was meant to lie forever with Elizabeth, each discovery chipped away at the mythology the monarchy had built around itself. Then came the audio confession. Then the sealed letter to William. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Camilla lost the version of the monarchy she thought she understood, and, perhaps, the version of herself she once trusted. The emotional toll was quiet but corrosive. Every item had a shadow. Every truth came with a cost. And while the world saw a queen stepping into power, Camilla felt herself pulled into a trap. A vault not of stone, but of consequences. If she spoke, she would ignite a fire that couldn't be controlled. If she stayed silent, she'd remain the unwilling guardian of a legacy built on manipulation and omission. The decision wasn't about jewelry, it was about justice, about who should carry the blame, and who had already carried too much. Some believe she's preparing, that documents are being drafted behind closed doors, sealed statements, perhaps even a memoir meant to surface only after Charles is gone. Others say she's left instructions that nothing be released at all, that the vault die with her. The truth? Only Camilla knows, and she's not revealing a word. Not yet. The vault is no longer just a chamber of royal possessions. It's a symbol of what the monarchy refuses to confront, its own fragility, its dependence on secrecy, its fear of the very history it claims to preserve. And while kings rule, and princes rise, and headlines shift, one truth remains unchanged. Camilla holds the crown. But more importantly, she holds the silence. And until the day she breaks it, the real story of Charles's vault, and the woman who unlocked its most dangerous truths, will remain sealed behind stone, silence, and shame.